Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be breaking down the Friday main slate of college football DFS for Friday, November 29th, 2024 of the Week 14 college football season. That's right, we've got a Friday main slate that lasts all day long. This tends to be the case here on Thanksgiving weekend where we've got a lot of teams playing on Friday and a lot of teams playing on Saturday. And we've got 11 games here on this slate, and we're going to break down all 11 for you and tell you who needs to be in or out of your DFS lineups here on this slate. Now, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. That way you can be with us for the Saturday main slate episode as well. I got to be honest, y'all, I wish I had gotten both these episodes out to you guys a little bit sooner, but the way DraftKings released the slates, it was a little bit later than I was expecting, so I didn't get to get all the research in and able to record here until tonight. So this is a little bit later than I had hoped, but still out there early enough for you guys that you can still use this information to build your lineups for both the Friday main slate and the Saturday main slate when that video comes out tomorrow. Now, I got to be honest, I personally really like this Friday main slate. To me, it feels like the final exam of college football DFS, because if you are like me and you have not only been playing the main slates of college football DFS, if you've been playing the night slates, if you've been playing the Maction slates, if you played the midweek Conference USA slates, if you've been playing the random Thursday and Friday slates, then you have seen every team here on this slate. If you haven't been, then you're going to see some new names and some new faces and some new teams, right? But if you've been playing every single slate, you know all these teams and you know what they do, you know what they're good at, and it really will allow you to have the leg up here this week. And I really do think that this week, I think that this slate is a game stacking slate. I think that there's going to be some games on this slate that go nuclear, and figuring out how to attack those is going to be the way to go. So that is why we're doing, this all 11 game breakdown here for you guys here on this episode. Now, if you want to make the argument that bowl season's the final exam, we don't have any opt-outs. We don't have any transfer portal guys. These are all of these teams as they're currently constructed at the end of the season with the opportunity for us to build some lineups. And we've got some big names on this slate. We've got Ashton Genty on the slate. So anyway, like I said, make sure you subscribe to the channel. These videos help you out. Please hit the like button. It helps me out a ton on YouTube. But let's go ahead and all right, so game number one of this slate is one of the games that I could absolutely see going nuclear. We've got Navy taking on East Carolina, or as we used to call it at Charlotte, ECU, because ECU is a school that is not high academic standards, very easy to get into. At least that's what we used to say at Charlotte, because ECU is kind of like our rival. But anyway, I digress. We've got Navy and ECU. ECU is 2.5-point favorites with a game total of 56.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 29 to 27 in favor of the Pirates. Now, what's interesting is you got ECU playing with an interim head coach, and they've kind of shored up some of their issues that they had early in the season when they had their previous head coach. Early in the season, they played at a very fast tempo. They threw the ball a ton, and they couldn't stop the run. They've kind of fixed that a little bit in all regards, but I still think that this Navy team is one that you can absolutely target. ECU does rank 87th in the nation, giving up 168 rushing yards per game. And for Navy, that's music to their ears because they're going to run the triple option, right? Now, Blake Horvath he's their starting quarterback. He did leave their last game against Tulane early. Look, if he's active, I think he's an absolute smash play. We really don't have any information as to whether or not he's going to be active or not, though. I am not interested in Braxton Woodson here in this spot. I don't think that the offense is going to run the same if Horvath is not active. So I'll be honest, I really don't have a lot of interest in this team if Horvath is inactive, because it's really hard to target the Navy running backs. You've got Eli Heidenreich, who does lead the team in receiving on the season, and he is their, kind of their pitch guy in the triple option more often than not, but his production has been super erratic, just super inconsistent, which tends to be the case from a guy that needs the defense to not play the dive and not play the quarterback, for him to get the ball right. And then they've got their dive guy Alex Texa. And he's okay, but he doesn't score a lot of touchdowns for being in that spot, and he doesn't rack up a ton of big plays, ton of big yards, right? So really, I just don't have a whole lot of interest in this Navy team unless Horvath is active. And if Horvath is active, he is my main piece of interest. On the ECU side, they start quarterback Caden Hauser now. He has replaced Jake Garcia. And Hauser, he's okay. He had 3 huge DraftKings performances in a row, 31 against Army, 31 against Temple, 47 against FAU. But the passing volume isn't super duper impressive. The efficiency with the yardage isn't super duper impressive. He doesn't have a whole lot of rushing upside. I think he's an okay play. I think he's really best used as a game stack play. If you're playing Horvath, if Horvath is active, I think Clayton Hauser on the other side makes a lot of sense, and seeing if this game can just pinball back and forth, right? Navy is a balanced defense somewhat. They rank 88th in the nation, giving up 169 rushing yards per game, and 67th in the nation, giving up 222 passing yards per game. And ECU's pass rate is down. They're about at the middle of the pack, now ranking 60th in pass rate. So I really think that my main interest in Hauser is playing a full-on game stack. Now, I do think that you can play Rajai Harris, though. Rajai Harris, since the interim head coach has taken over, has turned in 31 DraftKings points against Tulsa, 33 DraftKings points against North Texas. Now, granted, Navy is a better defense than both those teams, but they're making a concerted effort to get him the football under their new management. So Rajai Harris is definitely a guy that is going to make my player pool. At the wide receiver spot, I tried to find information on Chase Sowell and Winston Wright, but all I could find was the fact that they did not play in ECU's last game over North Texas, and those were this team's number 1 and number 2 wide receiver heading into that game. And so what ended up happening in that game with Sowell and Wright out was you saw a huge day from Anthony Smith. He had 4 catches for 121 yards and a touchdown, good for 24.1 DraftKings points. And then you also had a huge day from another receiver, Yannick Smith. 7 catches, 112 yards, and a touchdown in that game on 8 targets. So if Sowell and Wright are out again, I think that Anthony Smith and Yannick Smith are 2 of the best value plays at the wide receiver position on the entire slate. If Sowell and Wright are back, then they would probably be the leaders in the receiving corps once again. But you're really going to want to know for sure, because like I said, I do think that the Smiths, Anthony and Yannick, are outstanding plays if we get confirmation that Sowell and Wright are out. And again, I can't give you that confirmation at the time of recording. I can't find anything on this situation or any update. Next game up, we've got Oregon State taking on Boise State. Boise is 19-point favorites with a game total of 56.5 points. Here's why the 12-team playoff is so great. This game has college football playoff implications. Like, if Boise loses, they are certainly not going to the college football playoff, in my opinion. So, like, you've got a random game on a Friday between 2 teams that aren't even in the same conference. It's going to have college football implications. It's pretty cool, in my opinion. Anyway, on the Oregon State side, Boise is the definition of a passing funnel. They rank 9th in the nation in rushing yards per game allowed and 126th in the nation in passing yards per game allowed. Ben Gulbranson, to me, is in play as an option on DraftKings now that he is the starter and the fact that this Boise defense is a pass funnel. In his last 2 starts where he's played the full game, he threw 37 passes against San Jose State. He threw 34 passes against Washington State. And in that Washington State game, he put up 24 DraftKings points at a salary of $4,800 right now. So I really think he's a guy that is absolutely in play. What I think is the most interesting is that when we get to the Boise side, they've got running back Ashton Genty. You know about him. The way that people are going to get to Genty is by going super cheap and punting other positions. So, like, what I think is going to end up being a pretty common build is having Genty on one side of this game and having Gulbranson on the other, just because he is the cheapest starting quarterback, and it actually is a decent matchup for quarterbacks. At the running back spot, Oregon State does have a workhorse, Anthony Hankerson. He's great, but Boise's a really good run defense. And, like, on a slate with 11 games, why play a running back going up against one of the best run defenses on the slate? That doesn't make sense to me. If you do believe me that Boise State is a passing funnel, then you're going to want to play Trent Walker at wide receiver. In Gulbranson's last start against Washington State, he targeted Walker 15 times in that game. Walker caught 12 of them for 136 yards, which is good for 28.6 DraftKings points. Walker's a great play. He is buying away this team's volume leader, and this is a team that's going to look to be throwing, right? If you want to get a little bit different, you've got Terry for this team, who had 5 catches for 92 yards and a touchdown, 20.2 DraftKings points in that game. So, between Walker and Terry, you've got 2 legitimate stacking options that are pretty cheap with Gulbranson, and Gulbranson is cheap in his own right. So, really, you could build a cheap Oregon State stack and hope they keep this game close. And really, if we're talking about stacks, like, there's one thing to be said about getting the stack right, but there's another thing to be said about getting the individual players right? So, like, if you're playing an Oregon State stack, you can feel pretty darn confident that it's going to be Walker and Terry that are the beneficiaries. And so really, you don't have to get that second leg, right? You just have to get the Oregon State offense right, not the individual players right. And so to me, that makes more merit in playing an Oregon State stack like this, because they are so concentrated with their wide receivers. There's a few more teams like this later that we're going to talk about that concept with. On the Boise State side, they have got Maddox Madsen at quarterback, and he's pretty good. Oddly enough, this is the strangest thing. He seems to score more fantasy points on games where Ashton Genty also scores a lot of fantasy points, because it generally means that the Boise offense is just marching up and down the field. So I don't necessarily think that you have to play him with Genty or without Genty. I think that you can play him in either. And I think that a bet on Madsen is a bet on the Boise State offense as a whole more than anything else. Now, at the running spot, we do have to talk about Ashton Genty. This price tag of $14,300 is ridiculous. And he didn't even hit value in either of the last 2 games for this price tag or the price tags he was at. So why does he keep going up in price tag? Well, it's simple. The DraftKings algorithm takes ownership into account. And so when a lot of people continue to play him at these absurd salaries, his absurd salary continues to go up and up and up. So it begs the question, do you play Ashton Genty here on this slate? I think you can. I think there's certainly enough value elsewhere that you can fit him into your lineup, and I think that it's a good matchup. Oregon State ranks 107th in the nation with 188 rushing yards per game allowed. So if Genty just gets his season average of 188, that would be about Oregon State's average, right? So I do think that there's absolutely a possibility that Genty goes for north of 200 here in this one, multiple touchdowns in play. Boise is an offense that's implied to score 38 points. So I do think that this is a pretty good spot for Genty, and I do think that you can play him in your lineups because, like I said, I think there's enough salary relief elsewhere. Now, if you are looking to totally stack the Boise offense or play Maddox Madsen with some stacking partners, Cam Camper is buying away Boise's number 1 wide receiver, but he hasn't scored a touchdown in 6 games. So he's kind of due for one. And he generally catches probably about 4 passes a game if you look at it on average. So I do think that he's a solid look at $4,500. You also have the receiver that made me a lot of money against San Diego State. That was Latrell Caples. He's super cheap. He was this team's number 1 receiver a long time ago, and he randomly has games where he pops up as their number 1 wide receiver again. So I would definitely be looking to play him as a cheap stacking option as well. And I think you could even play him as a one-off play, given that he's all the way down there at $3,200. Next game up, we have a game that is truly stackable. Oklahoma State heading to Boulder to take on Colorado. The Buffs are 16.5-point favorites with a game total of 65.5 points, meaning that Colorado is projected to win this game about 41-25. And I could see this game having more points scored than that. Oklahoma State games just tend to end up in shootouts. And Colorado's defense is good but not great. They rank 49th in the nation in passing yards allowed per game and 74th in the nation in rushing yards allowed per game. So they're a little bit easier to be had on the run. Last week, I jokingly called their quarterback for Oklahoma State Melikaliki Maka Smith, which is, Merry Christmas in Hawaiian. And I actually wasn't that far off, but now that he is the permanent starter, I guess I need to figure out how to pronounce his name. I'm going to go with Miliaki Smith. I think I nailed it. Anyway, he's the starter for Oklahoma State. He put up 29 DraftKings points against Texas Tech. The Colorado defense is slightly better than Texas Tech, but this is an offense that is going to play at a super fast tempo. He's going to have plenty of volume. He can run a little bit. So I do think that $6,000 is a reasonable price to pay for Smith. But the guy I'm most interested in on this Oklahoma State team is Ollie Gordon. Remember this guy from last year? Remember how good he was? Well, guess what? He looked that good against Texas Tech. 156 yards, 3 touchdowns, also caught 3 passes for 30 yards. He's at a salary of $9,000, which means that nobody's going to play him because everybody's going to look at, I'll pay all the way up for Ashton Genty, or they're going to, just skip over Ollie Gordon. So I really do like Ollie Gordon here on this slate. He is one of my top running back plays on the entire slate, and I will be going back to him after last week's performance. At the wide receiver position, the good news is Meliaki Smith did continue the condensed passing game of this Oklahoma State offense. The good news is that they only throw to 3 receivers. Now, which of the 3 it's going to be that goes off on any given week? I can't really guarantee that, but I can guarantee that it's going to be one of the 3, which is more than we can say for some of these other offenses here on the slate. Brendan Presley is the slot, the volume king. He was targeted 12 times in that game against Texas Tech, caught 10 of them for 55 yards. That's pretty solid volume. Dejon Stribling was targeted 11 times. He's more of a big play threat. 7 catches, 133 yards, and a touchdown, 29.3 DraftKings points in that game. I think Stribling is a great play. And then you have Rashad Owens, who's been kind of a disappointment all season long, but put up his season high in fantasy points against Texas Tech. Targeted 6 times, caught all 6 for 124 yards and a touchdown. I think that Stribling is the best play of the 3 of them, given his big playability, given his upside, and given the fact that he only had 1 less target than Presley. So if I'm playing any of them, I'm probably going to be playing Stribling. But I think if you're playing enough lineups, if you're building up enough Oklahoma State stacks, again, they only throw these 3 guys. So you can mix and match different combinations of these 3 guys. On the Colorado side, this is a truly great matchup for Colorado. Oklahoma State ranks 132nd in the nation in rushing yards allowed and 125th in the nation in passing yards allowed. When it comes to the quarterback position, we looked at this last week. We did a deep dive in the article that I wrote for drroto.com, where Oklahoma State had played 5 Big 12 quarterbacks before last week, where they had either scored 27 DraftKings points or it was their top 2 passing performance of the season. In fact, it was both of those things, 27 DraftKings points and a top 2 performance on the season. And Baron Morton of Texas Tech made it 6 Big 12 quarterbacks where it's at least 27 DraftKings points and a top 2 performance on the season. So that makes it feel like you can pencil in Shedeur Sanders for 27 DraftKings points. And oh, by the way, his top 2 performances of the season are 37 and 34 DraftKings points. So you can pencil him in for, it feels like 34 DraftKings points in this one. And at a salary of $9,200, that's absolutely enough. This Colorado team loves to throw the ball. They rank 4th in the nation in pass rate. And you got to feel like also like they're going to groove it into Shedeur and Travis Hunter a little bit here on this one because they want Travis Hunter to win the Heisman. They want Shedeur Sanders to be the number 1 overall pick. So I do feel like this is going to be a great stats game for Shedeur just based off of that alone. In my opinion, when you look at this slate in its totality, Shedeur Sanders would be my pick to be the number 1 overall quarterback on this slate, and I don't even think it's that close. At the running back position, Isaiah Augustov is the starter running back for Colorado. But if I'm being honest, no Colorado running back has peaked at over 17 DraftKings points this season, which is just an insane stat. If you had faded the Colorado running back every single week this year, you probably would have been better off for doing it. But this is a great matchup. So I don't mind taking shots at Augustov at $3,800. But again, it's not a super likely outcome given how much this team throws the ball. Speaking of how much they throw the ball, you know somewhat who they're going to be throwing to. Last week, Travis Hunter did have 9 targets against Kansas, caught 8 of them, scored twice. He's a solid option, but man, he's an expensive stacking partner with Shedeur. But if I'm saying that you can play Ashton Genty because there's so much value plays on the slate, well, then you can stack Shedeur and Travis Hunter because there's so much value plays on the slate, right? Second up is LeJonte Wester. He's been really solid all season long. In fact, the game against Kansas was his first game in single-digit DraftKings points all season long. That's an insane amount of consistency. I still think you can go back to him here in this one. Will Shepard kind of cooled off in that game against Kansas. He had 2 straight 20 or more DraftKings points games before the game against Kansas, in which he only had 2. But the guy that's the most interesting to me, Jimmy Horn, we don't know if he's going to play or not. If Jimmy Horn does not play, then Draylon Miller is one of the best value plays on the slate. In the 2 games that Horn has not played, Miller had 25 DraftKings points against Utah, 15 DraftKings points against Kansas, was heavily featured in the offense, was an every down player at $3,800 on an offense that loves to pass the ball. I think the Draylon Miller, if Horn is out, is one of the absolute top value plays on the entire slate. Game number 4, we've got Ball State heading on over to Athens to take on Ohio and the Bobcats. Ohio is 14.5-point favorites with a game total of 52.5 points, meaning the implied total is about, I did my math wrong here. Hold on. I need a second to think, y'all. Because I'm looking at my notes and I did the math wrong, and I actually teach high school math, so that's kind of embarrassing if any of my students were to figure out that I did this. The implied total is about 33-19 in favor of Ohio. All right. So the reason why is because Ball State is one of the worst defenses in all the country. Ohio is one of the best defenses in not only the MAC, but in the country. I think you can full fade Ball State and be totally okay with this. Caden Samanza is Ball State's quarterback. He's had some good DraftKings performances, like when he had 36 against Buffalo, but this Ohio defense is a good one, and he doesn't have a track record of having any good performances against any kind of good defense. Braden Sloan is the workhorse running back for this team, but again, he's been really crappy lately because this Ball State team loves to throw the ball, and they've been going up against good defenses, so I'm kind of just not interested. At the wide receiver spot, Tanner Koziel is a tight end, but he functions as the wide receiver 1 for Ball State. He's been their leading receiver on the season. What's interesting is that Justin Bowick, who had 2 straight games of 34 DraftKings points or more, is redshirting the rest of the season because he's only played 4 games. It's super weird how it worked out. But with him out of the fold, Cam Pickett, Keon Magwood are due to see boosted usage. I'm probably still not playing him because, again, Ohio's a really good defense, but Pickett and Magwood, 2 certainly viable value plays at the wide receiver position. On the Ohio side, like I said, Ball State is bad on defense, y'all. They rank 102nd in the nation in rushing yards allowed and 130th in the nation in passing yards allowed. But Ohio is a team that wants to get there by running the football. They rank 19th in the nation in rush rate. Good news, a lot of that rushing is for quarterback Parker Navarro. He's totaled 31 rushing attempts in his last 2 games, and in both those games, he has been over 29 DraftKings points. And this Ball State defense is a worse defense than Toledo, is a worse defense than Eastern Michigan. So I think this is a great spot for Parker Navarro. I think he is one of the top quarterback plays in the slate, and I don't think a whole lot of people are going to play him because I don't think a whole lot of people are that familiar with him. But like I said, if you played all these slates like I have, you know this guy, you know what he does, you know that the Ball State defense is bad. I think Parker Navarro is in a great spot. At the running back position, Anthony Tyus is back to being the workhorse back for this Ohio team. He had 33 carries last week against Toledo. I don't think you can count on that insane volume of carries again, but if he does in fact get that many carries against this bad Ball State defense, then Anthony Tyus could absolutely smash the slate. The only thing that's a little bit of a concern is the guy doesn't score a ton of touchdowns because Parker Navarro will vulture them on the goal line. At the wide receiver position, Ohio doesn't have a ton of passing volume, so it's not worth talking a whole lot about these wide receivers, especially considering Chase Hendricks might be out for this game. But Coleman Owen is their wide receiver one. Look, he's had some big games. Like he has had 5 games over 20 DraftKings points this season, 2 over 34. So I am inclined to have him in my player pool, especially as a stacking partner with Parker Navarro. But I don't think you have to stack him with Parker Navarro by any stretch of the imagination. All right, that does it for the first segment of games. Let's take a quick breather, and then we're going to get on with the next part. Now, before we continue, I do want to mention there are places where you can get more information from me. First off, you can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I'm more than happy to answer any questions if you reach out to me on Twitter. I'm also tweeting out all updates for the show as well. So you can just stay in the loop, be aware of everything that's going on if you are following me on Twitter. Also, I do record these episodes like pretty far in advance. So sometimes opinions change, sometimes things happen. If you want my updated opinion on somebody, reach out on Twitter. I'm more than happy to answer. I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord. The link is in the description on YouTube as well as on the audio feed. Basically, the Fantasy Corner Discord is a community of a lot of really smart, really good people who play DFS for a lot of different sports. College football is one of them. College basketball is another. We also have NBA, NFL, MLB, anything else covered in there. But if you're looking for people to talk DFS with, there's people in there talking strategy, talking plays, talking lineups all day long, and then sweating it out together. It's just a great community to be a part of, and I cannot recommend it enough if you're just looking for people to talk DFS with. Also, if you want to know who actually makes my DFS lineups, head on over to the Patreon, patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. Every single college football DFS slate, as well as college basketball, I tweet out my core plays as well as why they're my core plays. I can't sit here and promise that you're just going to use them and print money. It's not that easy, but I can promise that you can get well-researched, well thought out, takes from somebody who understands game theory, who understands the X's and O's of college football, and knows the teams that are here on this slate, and can help you improve your game with college football DFS. All right, let's go ahead and continue with game number 5, which is going to be another showdown in the MAC between Miami, Ohio, and Bowling Green. Bowling Green is 2-point favorites in this one with a game total of 40.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 21-19 in favor of Bowling Green. Honestly, you can cross this game entirely off if you want to. These are two good defenses, two somewhat constipated offenses that I just don't really have a whole lot of interest in. On the Miami, Ohio side, this is a team that does like to throw the football, but Bowling Green ranks 6th in the nation in passing yards allowed. So this is not a good matchup. But Brett Gabbert is the starter for Miami, Ohio. We played him a lot on the action slates. He did good for us some weeks, did bad for us some others. I'm just not super interested. Like he just doesn't put up any huge yardage totals like ever. And you kind of need that if you want to put up a lot of DraftKings points. The running back position, Keon Mazzee is the starter for Miami, Ohio. He is like the only guy who ever gets carries. But this is a team that does want to win by throwing, and I just don't really see it. At the wide receiver position, we have been making money in action by playing Tracy and Virgil for Miami, Ohio. They're both about equal when you look at their production. In terms of picking one or the other, I don't know, man. It's just you're asking me to pick between two guys whose profiles are very, very similar. It really, I don't mind playing one of them and just hoping that you get it right. If you're playing a Gabbert stack for whatever reason, you can stack Gabbert with both of them because you can be pretty darn confident that all the receiving production is going to go to those two guys. On the Bowling Green side, Connor Bazelak is their quarterback. He's okay. But I, again, kind of like with Gabbert, he doesn't put up huge yardage totals, doesn't put up huge DraftKings totals. I think there's better plays elsewhere. The running back position, I do like Terrion Stewart. Miami is slightly a run funnel. They rank 12th in the nation in passing yards allowed, but 48th in the nation in rushing yards allowed. So Terrion Stewart has had some big games in action. I do think you can go to him as, I do think Miami can be had by the run a little bit. The wide receiver position, this is also a reason why I like Terrion Stewart. Harold Fannin Jr., the dominant tight end for Bowling Green, is questionable for this game. I don't know if he's going to play or not. I can't find any detailed information on it. He's great. He's one of the best receiving options in all of college football. But if he doesn't play, this passing offense is going to really struggle. If he does not play, that does have me getting a little bit of interest in Johnson Jr., who's been consistently involved in the passing attack week in, week out. And then also Raheem Smith, who had the huge game against Ball State last time out. 3 touchdowns in that game. Those are really going to be the only two playmakers on the outside for this team if Fannin is out. So they're cheap guys that you can go to as one-off plays, in my opinion. Next up, we have Minnesota taking on Wisconsin. Wisconsin is 2-point favorites with a game total of 42.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 22-20 in favor of Wisconsin. For Minnesota, they've got Max Brosmer at quarterback, and what shocked me to learn is that Minnesota ranks 25th in the nation in pass rate. They actually throw deceptively a lot. It really shocked me. Now, Brosmer, he's only had 2 games this season over 19 DraftKings points, but I don't know. I could talk myself into this because even though this game has a low total, he's got 2 super clear stacking partners, and the Wisconsin defense is not great. They are a little bit of a run funnel, though. They rank 15th in the nation in passing yards allowed, 84th in the nation in rushing yards allowed. So while I don't think it's mathematically likely that Brosmer has a big game, he is really easy to stack. So let's go ahead and talk about those wide receivers. Daniel Jackson and Elijah Spencer are like the only 2 guys that Brosmer throws to. Jackson more so than Spencer. Now, Spencer has had his moments, but Jackson is consistently targeted, has about a 30% target share on the season. He is a great one-off play, great stacking partner. And like I said, because they really only throw to those 2 guys, Brosmer's an easy stack. Even though the stack might not get there, it's easy to build. It's pretty likely to get the players right. And then at the running back position, they do have a workhorse running back in Darius Taylor. Now, last week we did have a touchdown from Marcus Major, which kind of messed Taylor up a little bit. But Taylor's a really good back. Wisconsin has struggled to defend the run, like we said, 84th in rush yards allowed. So I could kind of see myself playing Taylor as well here on this team. On the Wisconsin side, they're kind of like Minnesota, but a different version. Braden Lockett, not as good at quarterback as Max Brosmer, but he does have 2 games this season over 19 DraftKings points. And a salary of $4,800, that's not bad, honestly. But, game total of 42. Minnesota is a pretty good defense. They rank 20th in passing yards allowed, 37th in rushing yards allowed. But again, it's a pretty consistent stack because they have a workhorse running back, Tawee Walker, who gets all the carries. I think he's a pretty solid play at $5,800. And then at wide receiver, Will Pauling, who is normally the volume king for this Wisconsin team, is questionable. So what you got last week when he was out was you got a huge performance from Vinny Anthony II, 7 for 137 and a touchdown in that game, 8 targets in that game. And then Trek Kahuna has also been the guy all season long that when Pauling is out has stepped up against Purdue. He had 34.4 DraftKings points when Pauling, I believe, left that game early. And then you've got Bryson Green, who was also targeted 4 times without Pauling in that game, scored twice. So you really know who the receivers are going to be for this Wisconsin team. I think they make more sense as one-off plays than build out a full stack. And I think kind of this is like the game total makes this game have no business being stacked, but it's so easy to predict what players are going to score in this game that if it were to shoot out, it seems worthwhile to build out a stack for it. It's weird. It's super weird, but you just know that if this game has 50 points scored in it, you know where those 50 points are coming from. All right, next game up. Let's get less weird. Let's talk about a game that's actually going to feature a lot of points to be scored. Utah State at Colorado State. Colorado State is 6-point favorites with a game total of 58.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 32-26 in favor of the Rams. For Utah State, Colorado State is not a great defense. They rank 60th in rushing yards allowed per game and 104th in passing yards allowed per game. But Utah State is they're a little bit different looking team right now. Their quarterback Spencer Petras left the game early against San Diego State. I have no idea his status. He's an Iowa transfer, but he's been a lot better at Utah State than he was at Iowa. If he plays, I think he's a pretty solid play. If he does not play, then it's going to be Bryson Barnes, who is a Utah transfer, and he is mobile. Against San Diego State, he had 15 carries, 193 yards, and a touchdown on the ground. I think he's a super intriguing high upside play if Spencer Petras is in fact out for this game. But I definitely think he downgrades the Utah State wide receivers because of the fact that he's going to run the ball a ton. I also think he downgrades the Utah State running backs. Rasul Faison has had a pretty good season as a running back for them. Herschel Turner scored a touchdown against San Diego State. But if Bryson Barnes is going to be the starter, Bryson Barnes is going to be the primary ball carrier. So I'm not really interested in the Utah State running backs. For the Utah State wide receivers, Kyrese White, I should say, should be the number one wide receiver for this team. In the game against San Diego State, Barnes threw 15 passes. White caught 6 of them. So there's definitely merit to White being a big part of the game plan, even if Barnes is going to be the one throwing the passes. On the Colorado State side, they've got quarterback Braden Fowler-Nicolosi, and I can't talk myself into this one. I just can't. He's super cheap, $5,400, but he hasn't been above 23 DraftKings points all season. This is a team that runs the ball deceptively a lot, and I don't know. I feel like maybe as a game stack play, I could see it, but like just playing him in a vacuum at $5,400, I'm just not there. Just not. At the running back position, Anthony Morrow, a former Georgia Tech player, played for the Nets. Avery Morrow is the running back for Colorado State. He's been the starter all season long. He's been great. He's questionable for this game. Left the game early against Fresno. Don't know what happened. Can't get any information on it. But Justin Marshall in that game after Morrow left had 20 carries, 94 yards, and a touchdown. I think Marshall is one of the best value plays at the running back position on the entire slate, if in fact Morrow does miss. If Morrow plays, though, I don't really have interest in either of them because I think that Marshall kind of earned a little bit more of a share and Morrow might not be 100%. So it's a bad situation if Morrow's active. The wide receiver position, so this team has had to replace the production of Torrey Horton, who got hurt midway through the year, and they really haven't found one guy to do that. They've kind of moneyballed it. They've kind of done it in the aggregate, right? Caleb Goody has been their number one wide receiver since then, but he's just been okay, like nothing really huge. You've also had Jamari Person, who had the huge game against Fresno State, but before that, he hadn't done squat. 13 targets in that game, 9 catches, 112 yards, and a touchdown, 29.8 DraftKings points. But like before that, he was a non-factor. So I don't know what to make of that. You've also got the tight end, Vince Brown II. This tight end position for Colorado State seems to churn out guys into the NFL, whether it is Trey McBride or Dalvin Holker, but he hasn't really caught on this season at all like those two guys have. So yeah, it's a hard team to target in my opinion, but they are implied to score 32 points. My most interest in Colorado State would be to hope that Morrow is out and play Justin Marshall. Next up, we have the Egg Bowl. Mississippi State taking on Ole Miss. Ole Miss is 26-point favorites with a game total of 61.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 44-18 in favor of the Rebels. On the Mississippi State side, Ole Miss is the definition of a pass funnel. They rank 4th in the nation in rushing yards allowed per game, but 78th in the nation in passing yards allowed per game. Michael Van Buren, who sounds like a president, has been starting for Mississippi State ever since Blake Shapen got hurt in the Florida game. And honestly, after the Texas game, which is a really good defense, he really turned it on, had 4 straight games of 20 DraftKings points or more. The last 2 have been kind of duds against Tennessee and Missouri, though. I don't really know what to make of this guy. He's kind of difficult to predict, but $5,500 is a reasonable price tag. This game could turn into a shootout. It's not like the Ole Miss defense is impenetrable. I kind of get it at $5,500. He's not one of my favorite plays, but I could see it. At the running back position, Devon Booth has kind of taken over the workhorse running back role for this team, but Ole Miss is a really good run defense. I have no desire to play Booth against it. At the wide receiver position, the best player all season long on this Mississippi State offense has been Kevin Coleman Jr. He has had multiple games over 20 DraftKings points. I do have a little bit of interest in him, especially if you're going to stack Van Buren up. I don't have problems playing Kevin Coleman, but again, I still feel like there's better points per dollar plays out there than Kevin Coleman, but I do think that he's absolutely in play. Another guy that I'm going to continue to bang the drum for is Kelly Akrayi. I'm just going to because he was a really good receiver last year. Against Missouri last game, 3 catches, 64 yards, had 22 DraftKings points against Georgia earlier this season. I'm not ready to give up on him just yet. Next up, the Ole Miss side of this game. We got Jackson Dart at quarterback. And Mississippi State's a bad defense. This is a really good spot for Jackson Dart. Mississippi State ranks 127th in the nation in rushing yards allowed and 110th in the nation in passing yards allowed. And so what we saw out of Jackson Dart last week against Florida, which is a better defense than Mississippi State, You saw 29 DraftKings points. And the reason why is because he had 71 yards rushing. Basically, what ended up happening last week is because Ole Miss had some injuries at the running back position. They had no run game, and Jackson Dart became their run game. In fact, you look at the last 3 weeks, he's been over 47 rushing yards in every single week and hasn't scored a rushing touchdown. So I really am buying the fact that Jackson Dart is going to A, have to throw more because they have no run game, but B, have to run more because they have no run game. And so to me, that increases his ceiling quite a lot against a Mississippi State defense that is bad. And if you're not going to play Shedeur Sanders at $9,200, then I think you want to pay up for Jackson Dart at $9,900. It is really easy on this slate. There's a ton of value, so you can pay up for 2 big-time quarterbacks or 1 big-time quarterback and a big-time running back or big-time wide receiver with him. So I really do like Jackson Dart here on this slate. I feel like he does have a ton of upside because of the situation that he finds himself in. So speaking of that Ole Miss run game, Logan Diggs probably not going to play. Rashad Amos already out. Henry Parrish already out. USC's Bentley last week, not used at all after being kind of dreadful the week before. Matt Jones, 1 carry. Dominique Thomas, 3 carries. Like, that's it for the running back position. What they did last week at running back was they used a wide receiver. They brought in – hold on, I got to find him. I should have taken his name down in my notes. I thought that I was going to remember it. I did not. There he is. They brought in Micah Davis to be running back. He had 11 carries, 27 yards in that game, and he lost a fumble. So I don't know if they're going to go back to doing that again. Like, this team has no run game right now is what I'm saying. So I find Davis slightly playable at $3,000 if you think that he is out of the coach's doghouse after that fumble. And then at the wide receiver position in general, Trey Harris is questionable. I feel like he's always questionable, just always. If he plays, he's going to be a volume monster. He's going to have a ton of production, bottom line. If he does not play, the problem is that trying to find the guy who steps up when Trey Harris is out this year has kind of been a fool's errand. It's never been the same guy 2 weeks in a row. So, you had Jordan Watkins 1 week having 66 DraftKings points against Arkansas. That was great, but everybody was playing Juice Wells because Juice Wells had the bigger game the week before. And then last week, you have Caden Lee put up 21.4 DraftKings points, most of which were after Trey Harris left the game. And then, like I said, you had Juice Wells from his time early in the season that put up a lot of DraftKings points, right? So I really think that the way I would attack this would be I would stack Dart with Caden Lee, I think would be my pick. But like I said, it seems to alternate every week, but Lee has been the most consistent one of these guys week in and week out. All right, we got 3 games left to go. Let's take a quick breather, and then we're going to break them down. Quick reminder, if this video helps you out in any way, please hit the like button on YouTube. Please subscribe to the channel as well. That way you can be with us the rest of the college football season, all the way through bowl season and beyond. But let's go ahead and pick up and go with these last 3 games, right? This next one is a game that I personally love. I love watching both of these teams. They're super fun offensively. They are no huddle, up-tempo, aggressive offenses with quarterbacks who are just gunslingers and really impressive athletes. Like, I cannot stress enough how good both of these offenses are, and I'm really intrigued to see this game. Texas State at South Alabama. Texas State is 1-point favorites with a game total of 61.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 31-30 in favor of Texas State. On the Texas State side, South Alabama's defense is a little bit of a pass funnel. They rank 54th in rushing yards allowed per game and 117th in passing yards allowed per game, which is great news for Jordan McLeod. He's been a great quarterback all season long for Texas State. He has been over 30 DraftKings points in 6 games, which is quite impressive for his salary at $8,900. And he has some rushing upside as well. He doesn't always use his legs, but he has shown it enough this season. I think he's a great play. I think he's one of the top quarterback plays this late, $8,900. He certainly has some stacking partners as well, and a lot of those stacking partners are on the cheap side, which is what we like if we have an expensive quarterback. At the running back position, Ismail Mahdi is the workhorse for this Texas State team. The production kind of varies. Like, he hasn't scored a touchdown on the ground in the last 3 games, but he's really good. He gets usage in the passing game. He's a super athlete. He can break off long runs. So I do think that Mahdi's in pretty good shape for this one. I'm going to be getting him into my player pool for sure. At the wide receiver position, the wide receiver 1 for this Texas State team is Joey Hobart. He did not play against Georgia State, but ended up sitting. But what's the right word I'm looking for? he was expected to play but didn't. So basically, we don't really know what his injury situation here is in this one. When he's active, he is their number one wide receiver, though, I can tell you that much. So what you saw when he was inactive was you saw a big boost for Jaden Williams, who had 7 catches for 91 yards, was targeted 9 times in that game. He's a solid play at $5,100. You saw a big boost for Chris Don Jr., who caught 3 touchdowns in that game, 5 catches, 42 yards, and those 3 touchdowns were 29.2 DraftKings points. Don Jr. is like the guy that when somebody is hurt, he's like the guy that comes off the bench and immediately produces for whatever reason. I have no interest in him if we get news that Hobart is in, because he will not start if Hobart is in. But if Hobart is out, Don Jr. could absolutely do that again. The other guy that is interesting, though, and this is a straight-up misprice on DraftKings' part, is Cole Wilson. He's down here at $3,000. He should not be at $3,000. He averages 11 DraftKings points a game. He's been over double-digit fantasy points in 4 straight, and he will see an even bigger role in the offense if, in fact, Joey Hobart ends up missing. He's $3,000 flat. He should not be. I think that Cole Wilson is going to be in a ton of my lineups, whether I am stacking this Texas State side or not, because how many $3,000 even play up like lineups do you – I phrased that poorly. Let me restart. How many $3,000 players out there are every down players on a good offense in a good game environment that have had double-digit DraftKings points in 4 straight games? Not many. To me, he's a great play in or out of a stack. As a one-off play, whatever. Cole Wilson, great play here on this slate. On the South Alabama side, they've got Gio Lopez at quarterback, who's kind of like the light version of everything that I said about Jordan McLeod. He's a good quarterback. He is aggressive. He has a little bit of rushing upside, and he puts up a lot of DraftKings points as well. He hasn't had the same quite ceiling numbers that McLeod has, but he's also a little bit cheaper. And so I do think that playing both sides of this game as a game stack is certainly in play. At the running back position, I do think that the running back position is how you want to attack this Texas State team. They're a little bit of a run funnel. They rank 27th in passing yards allowed and 75th in rushing yards allowed per game. And if South Alabama is going to do that, it's going to be one of 2 guys. It's either going to be true freshman Fluff Bothwell, who has had more success over the course of the season, or it'll be Kentrell Bullock, who saw more carries last game, 14 carries against Southern Miss in that game. So I don't know which one is going to have more success, but I do know it's going to be one of those 2 guys. I generally don't like the idea of playing a running back committee on DraftKings, but you've got 2 guys who are good players with a good matchup, and they're both going to see work. I don't think it's the worst option in the world. At the wide receiver position, they do have a clear wide receiver 1 is Jamal Pritchett. He averages 23 DraftKings points a game. He's been over 27 in his last 3 games. He is just a volume monster. You know, we saw Colin Lacey have this role last year for them, and he transferred all the way up to Louisville because of how good he was in this role. And now that role belongs to Jamal Pritchett. I think he's a great play, one of the best wide receiver plays on the slate. After him, you've got a rotating cast of characters that I can never tell you, like, who is going to end up going off, right? You just don't know. Some games it's Watson, some games it's Eager, some games it's Webb, sometimes it's the tight end Thomas Jones. There was a little time earlier in the season where it was Shamar Sandgren. And then there's Javon Ivory, who's a Memphis transfer, who I think is one of the most talented receivers on this team, but he can't even see the field. So I really think I would keep it to just Pritchett only from this team, if I'm being totally honest. Next up, we got our second to last game, Liberty taking on Sam Houston State. Liberty is 3-point favorites with a game total of 47.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 25 to 22 in favor of Liberty. And for Liberty, they are going to score their points by rushing the football. They rank 6th in the nation in rushing rate. Considering that 3 of the teams ahead of them are service academies, there's only 2 other teams that are ahead of them in rush rate. They are going to run the football. And it's pretty good for them because Sam Houston State's a really solid pass defense. They rank 14th in the nation in passing yards allowed per game and 49th in the nation in rushing yards allowed per game. That's good news for Caden Salter because he's a quarterback who's going to score a lot via his legs. We haven't seen like the massive Caden Salter game like we saw like multiple times last year. Wouldn't shock me if it came here in this one because this is a game where they're going to run the ball and Sam Houston State has struggled to guard the run. So I think this is a pretty good spot for Caden Salter at $7,700, but it's all on the backs of his legs, not on the backs of his arm. His passing stats lately have not been good. He hasn't thrown for over 155 yards in the last 4 games. So I think you're playing him for his rushing upside, and I'm not stacking him with any wide receivers if I'm playing him. The guy that I'm more likely to play from this team, though, is Quentin Cooley. 4 games in a row, he's been over 20 carries. 4 games in a row, he's been over 22 DraftKings points. The last 2 games, he scored multiple touchdowns in both of them, 30 DraftKings points in both of them. I think he's a great option. Just great option at the running back position. And if you're looking at kind of this little mid-tier, he would be my preferred option in the mid-tier. So, like, obviously I'm not talking about Genty or Gordon, but like anybody between 7,500 and 6K, my favorite play would be Quentin Cooley. Just put it out there. On the Sam Houston State side, because like I said, we're not going to talk about the Liberty wide receivers. They're not throwing the ball. They rank 12th in the nation in rush rate. This is another team that's going to look to win by running the ball. Liberty is also a team that gives it up more by running the ball. They're ranked 71st in the nation in rushing yards allowed per game and 40th in the nation in passing yards allowed per game. So pretty solid matchup. Their quarterback, Hunter Watson, is much in the Caden Salter category, where most of his success is coming via his legs as opposed to his arm. I would personally rather play Salter because we've seen Salter do it more than we've seen Watson do it. And yeah, that's about it. I think Watson's not going to be very played in tournaments, though, so I think you can find yourself a very low-owned GPP quarterback with a lot of upside because of his legs. At the running back position, this is a little bit of a mess for them. Ducker has been the best one over the course of the season. When you look at the last 4 games, too, he's consistently had a roll double-digit carries in each of the last 4 games. You can't really say that about anybody else. DJ McKinney was having a moment when we were doing the midweek Conference USA slates, but he hasn't had more than 8 carries in a game in his last 3. And then you've got John Gentry, who was supposed to be the starter coming into the season, who has not played in recent weeks at all. So it really does look like it's Ducker's backfield at this point. And so if you're looking to play a Sam Houston State running back, a team that loves to run the football against a team that doesn't defend the run well, and their starting running backs only $4,000, I think Jay Ducker's a pretty solid play, in my opinion. The wide receiver position, I think you can totally skip this team, but I just want to point out Noah Smith. He was this team's best offensive playmaker last year. They kind of used him in like a Deebo Samuel type role. He's back healthy now. He wasn't healthy for a portion of the season, and I think that there's a chance that he could be back to being the old Noah Smith. And at $3,500, that's a very reasonable price tag for a guy who was much better than that last season. Last game of the day is a shootout. We've got Stanford, taking on San Jose State. San Jose State is actually favored to win this game, though, by 3 points with a game total of 55.5 points, meaning the implied total is 29-26 in favor of San Jose State. On the Stanford side, they're interesting because they start quarterback Ashton Daniels, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to bring in Justin Lamson, especially in the red zone, which kind of stinks because he vultured 2 touchdowns last week. But Daniels is their guy that's going to start and play most of the game now. But you better hope that if you play Daniels, he doesn't get his touchdowns vultured by Justin Lamson. At the running back position, it's been a mess all season long for Stanford. Micah Ford is the guy that I think you want, but again, the problem is he could get his touchdowns vultured by the quarterback, the backup quarterback. So, like, why would I want to play a running back when they're just going to get to the goal line and play a backup quarterback? So I'm probably passing on the Stanford running backs. Now, what I do think is interesting is the Stanford receivers. They're basically only throwing to 2 guys. Emmett Mosley, freshman, super talented, has had 2 huge games in his last 2 games. 51 DraftKings points against Louisville, 18 against Cal. He has been significantly the most targeted receiver over the last 2 games. Alec Ayamaner was the wide receiver 1 coming into the season. Huge DraftKings performances at the start of the season. Has kind of cooled off a little bit since. Those last 2 games that Mosley has gone off, Ayamaner has had 14.8 and 11.2 DraftKings points. So he's not totally out of the game plan. But what I think is going to happen is I think people are going to look at the recent production. They're going to play Mosley over Ayamaner, whereas I think this is a great spot for Ayamaner. I really do. He is a supremely physically gifted wide receiver, and he is going to be going out there, going up against these Mountain West San Jose State guys, and he is going to be more talented than them. And I think that that's the type of environment that you want to play Ayamaner in. Like, you look at what he's done, against TCU, 20.2, Syracuse, 21.7. Those are, DBs that he's more talented than. But then you look at Clemson, 15, Virginia Tech, 12, Notre Dame, 4, right? Like, when he has the talent advantage, he goes out there and he dominates these guys. So I do think that Ayamaner is a really good GPP play because I think everybody's going to gravitate towards Mosley, but I think they're both good plays, especially because I think this game has super shootout potential because San Jose State ranks 2nd in the nation in pass rate, and Stanford's defense is bad. They rank 127th in the nation in passing yards allowed. So, like, we've got a team that wants to do nothing but throw against a defense that gives it up throwing. This is a recipe for some offensive points. And with San Jose State to, people are not going to click them because they're going to look at their last game and see how bad they were. Well, it was like a torrential downpour when San Jose State played their last game against UNLV. So no wonder they weren't able to throw. It was windy and rainy. And so Walker Eget, their starting quarterback, was only able to put up 4 DraftKings points in that game. And that is just helping keep his price down here on this slate. I love him here as a play. The Stanford pass defense has been one we've targeted all season long. And Eget's a guy at $6,200 that has had 3 performances this season over 20 DraftKings points, which is what we want. So this is a really good spot for Eget, in my opinion. With Stanford being a good run defense and with San Jose State being an offense that all they want to do is throw, and with him not being a part of the passing game, I'm not that interested in Floyd Chalk IV. Sorry. At the wide receiver position, Nick Nash of San Jose State does rank as the top overall wide receiver play on the slate, in my opinion. He averages 30 DraftKings points a game, which is just an insane stat. And in non-torrential downpour games, he's like over 22 DraftKings points every single time, with the exception of last week when it was that downpour that we talked about. So I'm definitely interested in playing Nick Nash. I think this is a really sneaky game stack, and I think that if you build it out, because Eget is cheap, because Daniel is cheap, because the Stanford receivers are cheap, it offsets the cost of Nash. And so I do think it will allow you to get to Nash if you want to build out a game stack. If you don't want to get out to Nash, if you want to be kind of sneaky, Justin Lockhart is the wide receiver 2 for this team. He did not catch a pass against UNLV because no one did, but he was really trending in the right direction before that game. 2 straight games of 20 DraftKings points or more. The Boise State game, he actually outscored his teammate Nick Nash. So definitely have interest in both Nash and Lockhart here on this slate. I probably wouldn't play both of them together because that's a lot of salary, but I do think that you could play one or the other. I think you can play them as one-off plays. I think you can play them as stack plays with Eget. I think you can play them as game stack plays. I really do think that this is a game that you're going to want to target here as the last game of the window. But all right, y'all, that's going to do it here for this episode. So hopefully we gave you guys plenty of information that you can use to build your DraftKings lineups for this Friday main slate. But that's all we got. So if this video was able to help you out quite a bit, make sure you hit the like button on YouTube. Make sure you rate and review if you're listening on audio. I cannot stress enough how much those help me out. I really do appreciate it when you guys do that. And I cannot stress enough how much it helps me. Like if there's any way I've helped you, that is one way you can help me in return, is by doing that. But all right, y'all, that's going to do it for this episode. Make sure you come back for the Saturday main slate. Going to be recording that one tomorrow night. If you're subscribed to the channel, you would know when that video drops. But other than that, let's have some fun on this Friday main slate. We've got a lot of G5 teams. We've got a lot of teams that we should be more familiar with than the average college football DFS player, which means it should be a good slate for us on paper. So best of luck to you guys on this Friday main slate. Come back for the Saturday main slate, and I will see you guys next time.